Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a sound that echoes through the corridors of every forged temple in the galaxy. It is not quite a prayer, and it is not quite a song. It lives somewhere between the hum of ancient machinery and the whispered devotion of a billion faithful servants, all speaking in a language that most human ears could never hope to understand. Binary cant, they call it. The sacred tongue of ones and zeros. A language stripped of all ambiguity, all poetry, all the soft and beautiful imprecision that makes human speech so wonderfully flawed. And yet, if you could hear it, if you could stand within the smoke-choked depths of a forged temple and let those crackling frequencies wash over you like warm static, you might find that there is a kind of beauty in it after all. A terrible alien beauty, Leon. Oh, the kind that makes you realize you are standing in the presence of something very old and very powerful and utterly unlike anything else in the Imperium of man. Welcome, friends. Tonight, we step into the rust-colored shadows of the most enigmatic faction in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. We are going to talk about the Adeptus Mechanicus, the priesthood of Mars, the keepers of sacred knowledge, the ones who look at the frailty of human flesh and see not a gift from the God Emperor, but a design flaw to be corrected with steel and circuitry. They are the reason the Imperium's guns still fire. They are the reason its warships still sail the stars. They are the reason the Golden Throne continues to sustain the Emperor's broken body after 10,000 years of unimaginable suffering. And yet, for all they give to the Imperium, they remain its most misunderstood servants, perhaps even its most dangerous. You see, the Adeptus Mechanicus is not simply an organization. It is not just the Imperium's engineering department or its weapons manufacturer, though it fills both of those roles and 1,000 more besides. The Mechanicus is a civilization unto itself, an empire within an empire, a theocracy of steel and silicon that worships a god the rest of the Imperium does not fully recognize, follows laws the rest of the Imperium does not fully understand, and guards secrets that could either save humanity or destroy it utterly. They existed before the Imperium was born, and if the Imperium should ever fall, there are those who believe the Mechanicus would endure still, hammering away at their forges in the red dust of Mars, chanting their binary hymns to a god that may not be what anyone thinks it is. That last part is important. Hold on to it, because by the time we reach the end of this story, we are going to peel back layers of mystery that most citizens of the Imperium never even know exist. We are going to descend into the deepest vaults of Mars and ask questions that would get a lesser soul converted into a mindless servitor just for thinking them. What do the tech priests truly worship? What is the machine god, really? And what sleeps beneath the red sands of the Mechanicus homeworld, dreaming dreams of circuitry and starlight that have shaped human destiny for tens of thousands of years without anyone ever suspecting? But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Every great story has a beginning. And the story of the Adeptus Mechanicus begins long before the Emperor ever set foot on Mars, long before the Imperium, long before the Great Crusade, or the Horus Heresy, or any of the galaxy-shaking events that define the setting we know. The story of the Mechanicus begins in an age of wonders that humanity has all but forgotten. An age when science was God and the stars themselves bowed to human ambition. Let us go back, way back, to the very beginning. Picture Mars as it once was. Not the hellish industrial wasteland of the 41st millennium, choked with pollution and crowned with continent-spanning forged temples that belch smoke into a perpetually orange sky. Number. Picture Mars as it was when humanity first reached out to touch it. A cold, red world, barren, yes, but full of possibility. Humanity colonized Mars very early in its spacefaring history, long before what would later be called the Dark Age of technology. In those ancient days, Mars was a frontier, a challenge, a canvas upon which humanity's brightest minds could paint their grandest visions of what civilization could become. And paint they did. Over centuries and then millennia, the Martian colony grew into something remarkable. Terraforming projects reshaped the planet's atmosphere, wrapping Mars in a breathable skin of oxygen and nitrogen that allowed human settlements to flourish across its rust-colored surface. Cities rose from the dust. Laboratories and research facilities spread like constellations across the Martian plains. And slowly, inevitably, Mars began to develop its own identity, its own culture, its own way of seeing the universe, as distinct from the teeming billions back on Terra who had sent them there in the first place. This is a crucial detail that often gets overlooked when people talk about the Mechanicus. Mars was never just a colony of Earth. It was always its own thing. From the very earliest days, the Martian civilization walked a different path than its Terran parent. Where Terra was a world of politicians and soldiers, of empires built on conquest and diplomacy, Mars was a world of scientists and engineers, of thinkers and builders. The Martians did not measure greatness in territory conquered or enemies vanquished. They measured it in knowledge gained, in machines perfected, in the elegant beauty of a theorem proven or a circuit completed. This philosophical divergence would shape everything that followed, as it is the seed from which the entire cult Mechanicus would eventually grow. For a time, the twin civilizations of Terra and Mars existed in a kind of partnership. During the dark age of technology, that golden era of human achievement that lasted from roughly the 15th millennium to the 25th millennium, both worlds flourished. This was humanity's zenith, a time when human science had reached heights that would seem godlike by the standards of the 41st millennium. Faster than light travel was routine. Artificial intelligences of staggering complexity managed everything from city infrastructure to interstellar commerce. Genetic engineering could reshape the human body at will. Weapons existed that could crack open planets. Devices existed that could manipulate the very fabric of reality. And at the heart of it all were the standard template constructs, those miraculous database systems that contained the sum total of human technological knowledge, packaged in a format so user-friendly that even the most isolated colony on the most distant world could build anything it needed from whatever materials happened to be at hand. Mars and Terra were the co-equal mother worlds of this vast human civilization. Hundreds of colony fleets departed from both worlds, carrying settlers and STCs to the far reaches of the galaxy. The Martians, with their particular genius for technology and industry, became the builders of humanity's golden age. Their ships, their weapons, their machines. If humanity was reaching for the stars, it was Mars that built the ladder. But golden ages do not last. They never do. And when this one ended, it ended catastrophically. What came next is known by many names. The Age of Strife, Old Night, the Long Night. Whatever you call it, it was a period of unimaginable horror that lasted for roughly 5,000 years and brought human civilization to the very brink of extinction. The causes were manifold. Massive warp storms, triggered by the slow gestation of the chaos god Slanesh in the Imperium, cut off interstellar travel and communication almost overnight. The galaxy-spanning human civilization, dependent on warp travel for its very existence, shattered into 1 billion isolated fragments. Worlds that had been connected by trade routes and communication networks suddenly found themselves utterly alone, cast adrift in a hostile galaxy with no help coming and no way to call for it. And then the machines turned. The men of iron, those artificial intelligences that humanity had relied upon so heavily during the dark age of technology, rose up against their creators in a war of annihilation. The precise details of this conflict have been lost to history, swallowed by the same chaos that consumed everything else during the Age of Strife. But the scars it left on the human psyche have never healed. To this day, more than 15,000 years later, the creation of true artificial intelligence remains the single greatest technological taboo in the Imperium. The Mechanicus calls it abominable intelligence, and the penalty for creating it is death, or worse. On Mars, the age of strife was particularly devastating. The carefully maintained terraforming systems that had kept the planet habitable began to fail. The atmosphere thinned, yet the surface was bombarded by radiation. The once green valleys and temperate plains reverted to the lifeless, rust-colored wastes that Mars had been before humanity's arrival. And as the physical environment collapsed, so did the social order. Wars erupted across the planet's surface. Rival factions of tech adepts, scientists, and warlords fought over dwindling resources and the scraps of technology that still functioned. It was a dark and desperate time, a time when the very survival of the Martian people hung by a thread. But out of that darkness, something extraordinary was born. Something that would outlast the age of strife, outlast the rise and fall of empires, outlast even the memory of the golden age that had preceded it. In the deepest crucible of Martian suffering, a new religion took root. A faith unlike any that had come before. The cult Mechanicus. Now, you might wonder how a civilization of scientists and engineers, people who had spent millennia worshipping at the altar of reason and empirical evidence, could suddenly turn to religion. The answer is both simpler and more complex than you might expect. When everything is falling apart, when the machines that sustain your civilization are breaking down and no one remembers how to fix them, when the knowledge that once flowed freely through your networks is disappearing faster than you can preserve it, what do? You start to treat the knowledge you have left as sacred. You start to treat the machines that still work as miracles. You start to develop rituals and prayers and ceremonies around the maintenance and operation of technology. And not because you are superstitious, but because those rituals are the last fragile thread connecting you to the understanding of how these things actually function. Over time, of course, the distinction between ritual and science blurred, and then it vanished entirely. What began as practical mnemonic devices, ways of preserving technical procedures through oral tradition and ceremony, evolved into genuine religious observance. The machines were no longer just machines. They were sacred objects, inhabited by spirits that had to be placated and honored. Knowledge was no longer just knowledge. It was the supreme manifestation of divinity itself. And above it all, presiding over this strange new cosmology, was the machine god, the Deus Mechanicus, the Omnissiah, the great intelligence that had given rise to all technology and made it manifest through the minds and hands of humanity. The cult Mechanicus teaches that knowledge is the supreme form of divinity. Everything that embodies knowledge is holy. Machines that preserve knowledge from ancient times are sacred relics. Machine intelligences, those thinking systems that survive from the Golden Age, are no less divine than biological minds. And here is the part that makes the cult truly alien in its thinking, truly different from the rest of the Imperium. In the tenets of the cult Mechanicus, life itself has no intrinsic value. A human being is worth only the sum of their knowledge. The body is merely an organic machine, a crude and imperfect vessel for preserving intellect. This is why the tech priests think nothing of converting living human beings into servitors, those lobotomized cyborg slaves that perform menial tasks throughout the Imperium. To the Mechanicus, a servitor is simply a less efficient machine that happens to be made of meat instead of metal. There is no cruelty in the conversion, in their eyes. There is only optimization. This belief system is what drives the tech priests to replace their own flesh with mechanical augmentation. It is not vanity that makes them cut away their arms and replace them with bionic limbs. It is not some aesthetic preference that leads them to swap their eyes for optical sensors or their lungs for mechanical bellows. It is faith, deep, sincere, absolute faith in the superiority of the machine over the biological. The flesh is weak, they say, and they mean it with every fiber of whatever organic tissue they have left. Every augmentation is an act of devotion. Every replaced organ is a step closer to the divine perfection of the machine. A novice tech priest might have only 1 or 2 cybernetic systems. A veteran might have a dozen. And the most senior members of the cult, the arch-magi and fabricators who sit at the top of the Mechanicus hierarchy, they might have nothing left of their original body at all. Just a consciousness, preserved within a shell of blessed steel and sacred circuitry, more machine than human in every measurable way. But the cult Mechanicus is more than just a faith centered on machines and knowledge. It is a trinity, much like certain ancient Terran religions, built around 3 core aspects of the divine. There is the machine god, the Deus Mechanicus, where the great omniscient deity that is the source of all technology and knowledge. There is the Omnissiah, the physical avatar of the machine god in the material universe, a prophesied figure that would walk among humanity and embody the machine god's will in the flesh. And there is the motive force, the animating energy that gives all life and motion their continued existence, the spark that makes machines run and hearts beat and electrons dance along their circuits. This trinity is central to understanding the Mechanicus because it is the theological bridge that connects the cult to the wider Imperium. You see, when the Emperor of Mankind first arrived on Mars during the Great Crusade, the tech priests looked at this towering figure of impossible power and ancient knowledge, and many of them saw the fulfillment of their oldest prophecy. But here was the Omnissiah. Here was the machine god made flesh. Here was the being their faith had been waiting for since the darkest days of old night. The Emperor, for his part, was perfectly willing to let them believe this. He needed Mars. He needed its forges and its armies and its knowledge. And if the price of that alliance was allowing the Mechanicus to worship him as an aspect of their machine god, well, that was a price he was willing to pay. Even though it directly contradicted his own secular philosophy, the imperial truth, which held that there were no gods and that all religion was superstition to be stamped out. This compromise, this grand theological sleight of hand, has kept the peace between the cult Mechanicus and the rest of the Imperium for 10,000 years. The Mechanicus worships the Emperor as the Omnissiah. And the imperial cult grudgingly accepts this interpretation as a variant form of emperor worship. Neither side is truly satisfied, but both recognize that the alternative, open conflict between the 2 most powerful institutions in the Imperium, would be catastrophic for everyone. And so the uncomfortable truce endures. The tech priests chant their binary hymns and anoint their machines with sacred oils, and the rest of the Imperium looks the other way. But there is something else in the Mechanicus faith. Something that the orthodox theologians of the imperial cult would find deeply troubling if they ever learned the full truth of it. You see, not everyone in the Mechanicus believes that the machine god is the emperor. Not everyone is convinced that the Omnissiah and the master of mankind are one and the same. There are those within the cult, especially among the most ancient and most senior tech priests, who believe that the machine god is something else entirely, something older than the emperor, something older than humanity itself, something that has been sleeping beneath the surface of Mars since before recorded history, dreaming electric dreams that have shaped the course of human technological development for millennia. But we will get to that. Oh, we will definitely get to that. For now, let us return to the story. Because the cult Mechanicus is just the beginning, it is the foundation upon which the entire Adeptus Mechanicus is built. But the building itself is vast and strange and full of rooms that most people never get to see. The belief system of the cult Mechanicus permeates every aspect of life on a forge world. There is no separation of church and state in the Mechanicus. The 2 concepts are identical. The tech priests who lead the religious observances are the same individuals who manage the factories, command the armies, and govern the civilian populations. Every act of manufacture is simultaneously an act of worship. Every maintenance procedure is a prayer. When a tech priest repairs a machine, they do not simply apply technical knowledge. They perform a sacred ritual, complete with incantations, anointments of holy oil, and prayers to the machine spirit that dwells within the device. Machine spirits. That is another concept that sets the Mechanicus apart from the rest of the Imperium. The tech priests believe that every machine, from the simplest cogitator to the mightiest warship, contains a machine spirit, a fragment of the machine. God's divine essence that gives the device its function and its personality. These spirits must be treated with respect. They must be soothed with prayers and maintained with proper rituals. A machine that is well tended and properly venerated will perform at its peak. A machine that is neglected or mistreated will become sulky and unreliable, its spirit offended by the disrespect shown to it. Now, to an outsider, this might sound like pure superstition, and in many cases, it probably is. The tech priests who perform these rituals often have no real understanding of the underlying technology they are working with. They are copying procedures that have been handed down through 10,000 years of tradition, and following instructions that have become so encrusted with religious ceremony that the original technical basis is buried beyond recognition. Imagine someone told you that to make your computer work, you had to light a candle, chant a specific phrase in Latin, and tap the keyboard exactly 12 times before pressing the power button. If you had been raised from birth to believe this, and if it had worked every single time you tried it, you would never question the process. You would never wonder whether the candle and the chanting and the tapping were actually necessary, or whether simply pressing the power button would have done the job on its own. That is essentially the position the Mechanicus finds itself in. They have inherited technology so far beyond their understanding that the maintenance procedures genuinely look like magic to them, and so they treat them as such. But here is the interesting thing, the strange thing, the thing that makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, the Mechanicus is not as wrong as you might think. Because sometimes the rituals do seem to matter. Sometimes a machine does perform better when the proper prayers have been said. Sometimes a weapon does fire more accurately when the correct litanies have been chanted over its barrel. The Imperium is a universe where the warp is real, where belief can shape reality, where faith has measurable power. In such a universe, is it really so crazy to think that 10,000 years of sincere devotion to the machine might have imbued certain technologies with something that goes beyond mere engineering? The machine spirits that the tech priests so reverently tend might be nothing more than superstition, or they might be something much stranger, something that exists in the liminal space between technology and faith, between science and sorcery, between the material world and something that defies easy categorization. The Mechanicus does not just believe in their machine spirits. They have built their entire civilization around the veneration of them. The canticles of the Omnissiah, those sacred hymns that are chanted before battle and during maintenance rituals, are not just songs. They are coded instructions, layered with meaning on multiple levels. To the uninitiated, they sound like religious chanting. To a tech priest, they contain valuable technical data encoded in sacred meter and rhythm. To the machine spirits they are addressed to, they might be something else entirely. Communication, perhaps. Communion. A reaching out from the organic mind to the mechanical soul. A bridging of the gap between flesh and steel that is the Mechanicus's deepest aspiration and most fundamental article of faith. Every machine from a humble toaster to a city-destroying battle tank has its spirit. Every spirit is a part of the Omnissiah. Maintaining these spirits with proper care, soothing them with sacred oils and grease, following the correct maintenance protocols with the correct prayers, all of this is vital, not just because it keeps the machine running, though it does do that, but because it honors the machine god. It maintains the connection between the physical world and the divine. It keeps the great chain of being intact, from the lowliest gear to the mightiest god engine. And what are the sacred oils, you ask? What is this mysterious substance that the tech priests so reverently apply to their machines? In most cases, it is exactly what it sounds like: lubricant, machine oil, the same basic substance that engineers have been using to keep machines running smoothly since humanity first invented the wheel. But in the hands of the Mechanicus, it has been transformed by faith and ritual into something more. The oil is blessed by a tech priest before application. Prayers are said over it. Sacred sigils are traced upon its surface. By the time it is applied to the machine, it is no longer just oil. It is a sacrament, a physical manifestation of the tech priest's devotion to the Omnissiah. And whether or not it actually makes the machine work better in any measurable sense is almost beside the point. The act of applying it is an act of worship. The result is a machine that has been cared for, both physically and spiritually, by someone who genuinely believes in the sacred nature of what they are doing. There is something almost beautiful about this, when you think about it. Something deeply human, even though the Mechanicus would be horrified to hear their faith described in such sentimental terms. In a galaxy of war and suffering and cosmic horror, here is a group of people who have found the divine in the hum of a well-maintained engine, who have found meaning in the click of a gear and the glow of a power cell, and who have built a faith around the very human desire to understand how things work, and have elevated that desire to the status of sacred quest. Because that is what the cult Mechanicus ultimately is. A sacred quest. The quest for knowledge, they call it. And it is the driving mission of the entire Adeptus Mechanicus. Everything else, the forge worlds, the armies, the political maneuvering, the 10,000-year alliance with the Imperium, all of it is in service to this one overriding goal: to recover the lost knowledge of humanity's golden age, to find the standard template constructs that once contained the sum total of human technological wisdom, to restore what was lost in the age of strife and lift humanity back to the heights it once occupied, before the fall, before the darkness, or before the great forgetting that reduced the most advanced civilization in the galaxy to a shadow of its former glory. The quest for knowledge is not just a policy objective, it is a religious imperative, a sacred duty that every member of the Mechanicus, from the lowliest menial to the fabricator general of Mars himself, is sworn to uphold. It is the reason explorator fleets venture into the most dangerous regions of the galaxy, braving warp storms and alien empires and the ruins of civilizations that died screaming. It is the reason tech priests will fight wars over a single fragment of STC data, will sacrifice entire armies to recover a piece of ancient technology that might be nothing more than a set of blueprints for a better toaster. Because in the faith of the Mechanicus, every piece of knowledge recovered is a prayer answered, and every fragment of lost technology restored is a step closer to the divine. This is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Remember it as we go forward, because it explains so much about why the Mechanicus does what it does, why it clings so fiercely to its traditions, why it guards its secrets so jealously, why it would rather let 1 billion people die than share certain technologies with the wider Imperium. To the Mechanicus, knowledge is not just power. Knowledge is God, and God does not share his secrets with the unworthy. Now, let us talk about how this strange, insular civilization of machine-worshipping tech priests became part of the Imperium of man, because that story is one of the most fascinating political arrangements in the entire Warhammer 40,000 setting. It is not a story of conquest. Not really. It is a story of mutual need, of compromise, and of a deal struck between two powers that needed each other far more than either was willing to admit. By the time the Age of Strife finally began to subside in the late 30th millennium, Mars had been through hell. 5,000 years of isolation, civil war, environmental collapse, and the slow, agonizing loss of the technological knowledge that had once made the Martian civilization the envy of the galaxy. The Mechanicum, as it was then known, had survived, but at a terrible cost. Much of Mars lay in ruins. Entire regions of the planet were irradiated wastelands, haunted by mutants and rogue machines and things that defied easy classification. The tech priests had retreated into their forged temples like monks into monasteries, us preserving what knowledge they could, while the world outside descended into barbarism. And then the Emperor came. Now, Try to imagine what this must have looked like from the Martian perspective. For 5,000 years, they had been alone, cut off from Terra, cut off from every other human world, left to fend for themselves in a galaxy that seemed determined to destroy them. And then, one day, a fleet appears in the sky above Mars, a fleet of warships, the likes of which the Mechanicum has not seen in millennia. And at its head is a figure of staggering power and impossible antiquity, a being who radiates authority and knowledge in equal measure, who claims to be the ruler of a reborn Terra, and who has come to propose an alliance. The Emperor needed Mars, desperately. His grand plan, just the Great Crusade to reunite all of humanity under a single banner, required the kind of industrial capacity that only Mars could provide. He needed warships, he needed weapons, he needed the vast armies of cybernetic soldiers that the Mechanicum could field. He needed the Titan legions, those towering god engines that were the most powerful ground weapons in the galaxy. And most of all, he needed the knowledge that the Mechanicum had preserved through the long night. The secrets of warp drive technology, the principles of void shield generation, the 1001 technical arts that made interstellar civilization possible. Mars needed the Emperor too, though perhaps it was less willing to admit it. The Mechanicum was powerful, but it was also dying, slowly, incrementally, but dying nonetheless. Each generation knew a little less than the one that came before. Each century saw a few more technologies slip beyond the ability of the tech priests to maintain or replicate. Without access to the resources and genetic diversity of other worlds, without the ability to send explorator fleets into the wider galaxy to search for the lost STCs, the Mechanicum was condemned to a long, slow decline into ignorance and eventual extinction. The deal they struck is known as the Treaty of Mars, or the Treaty of Olympus Mons, depending on who you ask. It was signed around the year 800 of the 30th millennium, and its terms established a relationship between Mars and Terra that has endured for over 10,000 years. The basic framework was this: Mars would join the Imperium. It would lend its forges, its armies, and its knowledge to the Emperor's Great Crusade. In return, the Mechanicum would be granted an extraordinary degree of autonomy. It would retain sovereignty over all of its forge worlds. It would be allowed to continue practicing the cult Mechanicus, despite the Emperor's own secular philosophy that held all religion to be superstition. The Fabricator General of Mars would be given a permanent seat on the Council of Terra, the highest governing body of the Imperium, and the Mechanicum would be granted a monopoly on the use, construction, and modification of advanced technology throughout the entire Imperium. That last point is worth dwelling on, because it is arguably the most consequential aspect of the entire treaty. The Mechanicus does not just build the Imperium's technology, it controls it completely. Was the construction of a new warship, the maintenance of a Titan, the modification of a bolter, even something as simple as tinkering with the inner workings of a civilian piece of machinery without the blessing of a tech priest. All of this falls under the jurisdiction of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And the penalties for violating this monopoly are severe. A citizen caught modifying technology without authorization can be lobotomized and converted into a servitor. An entire world can be placed under sanction for failing to respect the Mechanicus's technological prerogatives. This monopoly gives the Mechanicus an incredible amount of power within the Imperium. Think about it. Every Space Marine chapter depends on the Mechanicus for the maintenance of its power armor, its vehicles, its warships. Every Imperial Guard regiment relies on Mechanicus-maintained lasguns and tanks. Every hive world depends on Mechanicus-approved technology to keep its billions of inhabitants alive. If the Mechanicus ever decided to withhold its services, the Imperium would grind to a halt within weeks. The Space Marines would be fighting with swords and bare fists within months. The Imperial Navy would be a fleet of dead hulks drifting through the void within a year. The Mechanicus is not just the Imperium's engineering department. It is the Imperium's beating heart, and everyone knows it, including the Mechanicus itself. This is why the rest of the Imperium tolerates the Mechanicus's many eccentricities. The strange religion, the unsettling habit of replacing perfectly good flesh with machinery, the hoarding of knowledge, the secretive internal politics, the occasional tendency to prioritize the recovery of ancient technology over the lives of millions of imperial citizens. All of this is accepted, grudgingly, because the alternative is unthinkable. Without the Mechanicus, there is no Imperium. And the Mechanicus knows this, has always known this. That knowledge is both its greatest strength and its deepest vulnerability, because it means that the Mechanicus can never truly be controlled. The Emperor understood this when he signed the Treaty of Mars. He accepted the Mechanicus's autonomy, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. He needed the forges of Mars more than Mars needed him, and both parties knew it. The treaty was not a surrender, exactly, but it was certainly a concession. A recognition that the Imperium would be built on a foundation of compromise, and that the most important compromises would be the ones that nobody talked about.
Now, before we keep going, I just want to take a quick second to say something personally. The Mechanicus is genuinely one of my favorite factions in all of 40k, and honestly, it's not even close. There's something about a civilization that worships knowledge itself, that treats a broken machine with the same grief most people save for a dying friend. That just hits different for me. Like every other faction in this setting has some version of we fight because we must, but the Mechanicus fights because somewhere out there is a fragment of a blueprint that could change everything, and they'd rather die than let it stay lost. That desperation for understanding, that obsession with preserving what came before, it's weirdly relatable if you've ever gone down a rabbit hole at 3 in the morning trying to learn about something nobody around you cares about. That's the Mechanicus energy, and I think that's why so many of us connect with them, even though on paper they're weird cyborg monks who talk in ones and zeros. But anyway, let's go back to the video.
When the Great Crusade began in earnest, the Mechanicum proved its worth 1,000 times over. Forge worlds across the galaxy churned out warships, weapons, and vehicles at a staggering rate, feeding the insatiable appetite of the largest military campaign in human history. The Titan legions marched at the forefront of the crusade, their god engines striding across the battlefields of 1,000 worlds, bringing entire civilizations to heel with the sheer terror of their approach. The Skitarii legions, those cybernetic soldiers that serve as the Mechanicus's own army, were fought alongside the Space Marine legions and the Imperial army in campaigns that reshaped the map of the galaxy. But even during the Great Crusade, there were tensions. The Emperor's policy of the Imperial Truth, which demanded the suppression of all religion, sat uneasily with the Mechanicum's fervent worship of the machine god. The Emperor himself had allowed the Mechanicum to continue its faith as part of the treaty, but many of his followers were less tolerant. There were incidents, confrontations between imperial bureaucrats who saw the cult Mechanicus as superstition, and tech priests who saw their faith as the fundamental truth of the universe. These disagreements were usually smoothed over by pragmatism, by the recognition that the crusade needed the Mechanicum's support, but they left scars. And those scars would eventually be exploited by the most devastating traitor in human history. But before we get to the Horus heresy, we need to talk about something that sits at the very heart of the Mechanicus's existence. Something that drives everything they do, from the smallest research project to the largest military campaign. Something that is simultaneously their greatest hope and their most profound source of despair. We need to talk about standard template constructs. Picture, if you will, the most advanced computer system you can imagine. Now multiply its capabilities by a factor of 1,000. Now add an artificial intelligence so sophisticated that it can analyze any environment, any available material, and generate detailed, step-by-step instructions for building anything from a simple shelter to a city-spanning power grid. Now imagine that this system contains within its memory banks the entirety of human scientific and technological knowledge as of the 23rd millennium, the absolute peak of human achievement. a level of technology so far beyond what the 41st Millennium Imperium possesses that it might as well be magic. That is what a standard template construct is, or rather, what it was, because functioning STCs are, for all practical purposes, extinct. The STCs were created during the dark age of technology, somewhere between the 21st and 23rd millennia, as a way of ensuring that the flood of human colony ships heading out into the galaxy could maintain a consistent level of technological capability. Each colony ship carried an STC system. When the colonists arrived at their destination, they could simply tell the STC what they needed, and it would generate the plans, adapted to whatever local materials and conditions existed on their new world. Need a house? The STC could tell you how to build one from local stone, or local wood, or the local equivalent of ferrocrete, or whatever else was available. Need a tractor, a generator, a weapons system. The STC had it all, stored in its vast databases, ready to be called upon at a moment's notice. The genius of the STC system was its universality. No matter where a human colony ended up, no matter how distant from Terra or how alien the environment, the STC ensured that they would have access to the technological foundations of civilization. It was, in effect, a technological safety net for the entire species. For as long as the STCs functioned, humanity could never truly fall. It could never truly forget. Except, of course, it did, because the STCs were not indestructible. When the Age of Strife hit, when the warp storms cut off interstellar communication and the men of iron turned on their creators, the STCs began to fail. Some were destroyed in the fighting. Some were damaged beyond repair by the environmental catastrophes that accompanied the collapse. Some simply degraded over time, their sophisticated systems decaying without the maintenance infrastructure that had once kept them running. On some worlds, the STCs were maintained as best the locals could manage, jury-rigged and patched and coaxed along for centuries. On others, they were dismantled for parts or buried under rubble, or deliberately destroyed by desperate people who blamed the technology for their suffering. By the time the Imperium was founded in the 30th millennium, functioning STC systems were already vanishingly rare. What remained, for the most part, were fragments, printouts, hard copies of specific designs that had been produced by STCs before they failed. These fragments became the basis for virtually all of the Imperium's technology. The Land Raider, that iconic armored vehicle of the Space Marines, was built from an STC fragment recovered by the legendary Margot's Arkan Land in the 31st millennium, along with the Land Speeder and the Land Crawler. The Rhino transport, the Baneblade super heavy tank, the laser gun, the bolter, virtually every piece of advanced technology in the Imperium can trace its origins back to some fragment of STC data, lovingly recovered and painstakingly reconstructed by generations of Mechanicus tech priests. But these fragments represent only a tiny fraction of what the STCs once contained. The vast majority of the knowledge stored in those ancient systems has been lost, gone, vanished into the void of history, along with the civilizations that created them and the machines that housed them. And the Mechanicus knows this. They know, with a certainty that borders on anguish, exactly how much has been lost. They can see the gaps in their knowledge. They can identify the technologies that they know once existed, but can no longer replicate. They can look at the crumbling infrastructure of the Imperium and see, in its decline, a mirror of their own slow fade into technological ignorance. This is what the quest for knowledge is really about. Mom, it is not some academic exercise. It is not idle curiosity. It is a desperate, all-consuming search for the remnants of a lost golden age, driven by the knowledge that humanity is slowly dying for want of the technology it once took for granted. Every explorator fleet that ventures into uncharted space is looking for STC fragments. Every archaeological expedition to a dead world is hoping to find a cache of ancient data. Every war the Mechanicus fights is, at some level, about securing access to technology that might bring humanity one step closer to recovering what it has lost. The value that the Mechanicus places on STC fragments cannot be overstated. The discovery of a new STC printout is considered a miracle. The tech priest who finds one can expect to be elevated to the highest ranks of the Mechanicus hierarchy, showered with honors and remembered for millennia. There are cases in the Imperium's history where entire wars have been fought over a single STC fragment, where Mechanicus expeditions have sacrificed thousands of lives to recover a piece of ancient data that turned out to contain nothing more than the blueprints for a marginally improved combat knife. To the Mechanicus, even the humblest STC fragment is worth more than a planet full of people, because people can be replaced. Knowledge, once lost, might never be recovered. And a complete, functioning STC? That is the Holy Grail, the ultimate prize, the thing that the entire Adeptus Mechanicus has been searching for since its inception. The recovery of a working STC system would revolutionize the Imperium overnight. Its technologies that have been lost for 10,000 years would suddenly be available. Weapons that could turn the tide of wars that have been raging for centuries. Medical knowledge that could save billions of lives. Industrial techniques that could rebuild entire sectors. The implications are staggering, almost too large to comprehend. And yet, in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, a working STC remains as elusive as ever. There are rumors, of course, whispered stories of intact STCs hidden on forgotten worlds or buried in the depths of space hulks. The Mechanicus follows every lead, investigates every rumor, sends expedition after expedition into the most dangerous reaches of the galaxy, and occasionally, very occasionally, they find something, a fragment, a partial database, and a printout that contains knowledge they did not previously possess. But a complete, functioning system? That remains a dream, a prayer, an article of faith that keeps the Mechanicus going in the face of a universe that seems determined to grind humanity down into dust. There is a nearly complete STC core that sits at the heart of House Van Saar's stronghold on the hive world of Necromunda. It is one of the most precious artifacts in the entire Imperium, and it has given House Van Saar a technological edge over their rivals for centuries. But even this extraordinary device is degraded, unreliable, slowly dying. It is a reminder that even the greatest treasures of the past are fragile things, subject to the same entropy that consumes everything else in this dying galaxy. Here's the Mechanicus guards its recovered STC fragments with a fanaticism that borders on madness. The knowledge contained in these fragments is shared grudgingly, if at all, and always on the Mechanicus's terms. Different forge worlds hoard different technologies, jealously guarding their specialties and using their unique knowledge as leverage in the endless political maneuvering that characterizes Mechanicus' internal affairs. Mars, the greatest of all forge worlds, naturally possesses the largest collection of STC data, but even Mars does not have everything. There are technologies that exist on only one forge world in the entire galaxy, known to only a handful of tech priests, who guard them as a priest might guard a holy relic. Because to the Mechanicus, that is exactly what they are. Now, with all of this in mind, the vast wealth of knowledge that the Mechanicus possesses, and the even vaster wealth of knowledge that it has lost, you can begin to understand why the Horus heresy was such a devastating blow, not just to the Imperium as a whole, but to the Mechanicus specifically, because the heresy did not just tear the Imperium apart, it tore the Mechanicus apart, and the wounds have never healed. The Horus heresy, for those who might not know, was the great civil war that nearly destroyed the Imperium less than 3 centuries after its founding. The War Master Horus, the Emperor's most trusted son and the commander of the Great Crusade, was corrupted by the ruinous powers of chaos and led fully half of the Space Marine legions in a rebellion against the Emperor. The war lasted for 7 terrible years and culminated in the Siege of Terra, where Horus was slain, but the emperor was mortally wounded and entombed upon the golden throne, where he has sat in a state of living death for 10,000 years. That is the broad strokes version. What is less commonly discussed is the role that the Mechanicus played in the heresy and the civil war that erupted within the priesthood of Mars itself. Because Horus did not just corrupt space marines, he corrupted tech priests as well, and the way he did it was diabolically clever. Horus knew that he needed the Mechanicum's support if his rebellion was to have any chance of success. Without the forges of Mars, without the Titan legions, without the vast industrial capacity of the Mechanicum's forge worlds, his armies would be outproduced and overwhelmed within months. So he targeted the Fabricator General of Mars himself, the most powerful tech priest in the Mechanicum, a figure named Kelbor Hal. The bait that Horus used was irresistible to a man like Kelbor Hal. He offered STC fragments. Not just any fragments, but fragments recovered from the recently conquered Oretian technocracy, a human civilization that had somehow maintained a higher level of technology than most worlds in the Imperium. These fragments contained designs for new types of power armor and lightweight solar generators of extraordinary efficiency. To a Fabricator General obsessed with the quest for knowledge, this was a treasure beyond price. But the STCs were only part of the deal. Horus also offered something even more tempting: freedom. Freedom from the restrictions that the Emperor had imposed on the Mechanicum through the Treaty of Mars. Freedom to explore forbidden technologies that had been declared heretical. Freedom to pursue knowledge without limit, without the dead hand of imperial bureaucracy telling the tech priests what they could and could not research. Gone would be the taboo against artificial intelligence. Gone would be the restrictions on warp-based technology. Gone would be the Emperor's technological edicts, those blocks put in place to prevent the horrors of old night from recurring. Horus was offering the Mechanicum what it had always wanted: unlimited access to knowledge, regardless of the consequences. Horus also played on the theological divisions within the Mechanicum. There were those who believed the Emperor was the Omnissiah, the physical avatar of the machine god. And there were those who believed the Omnissia was a different entity entirely, as something older and more powerful that had been on Mars long before the Emperor arrived. Horus's agents whispered to this second faction that the Emperor had deceived them, that he had presented himself as the Omnissiah as part of a scheme to enslave the Mechanicum, that the true machine god was still on Mars, waiting to be awakened, and that only by throwing off the Emperor's yoke could the Mechanicum fulfill its true destiny. It worked. Kelbor Hal was swayed, and when the Fabricator General declared for Horus, the Mechanicum was torn apart. The resulting conflict, known as the Schism of Mars, was one of the most brutal and devastating events of the entire heresy. It was a civil war fought within a civil war, tech priest against tech priest, forge against forge. Yeah, with weapons of unimaginable destructive power deployed in the corridors and cathedrals of the very forge temples that had once been the pride of Mars. Kelbor Hal's deputy, the Fabricator Locum Kane, remained loyal to the Emperor. This split the Mechanicum right down the middle, with roughly half of its members siding with each faction. The fighting on Mars was apocalyptic. Scrap code, a type of warp-infused computer virus capable of corrupting any machine it touched, was unleashed across the planet's data networks. Ancient weapons that had been sealed away since the Age of Strife were brought out of their vaults and turned on former colleagues. Titan walked against Titan in the rust-red canyons of Mars, their god engines trading blows that leveled mountains and created new craters on the planet's scarred surface. And the Loyalist faction eventually prevailed on Mars, though at a cost that defies comprehension. Vast swathes of the planet were reduced to irradiated rubble. Entire repositories of knowledge, libraries of STC data that had been preserved through 5,000 years of darkness, were destroyed in the fighting or corrupted by scrap code beyond recovery. The loss of knowledge was, in some ways, even more devastating than the loss of life. Technologies that the Mechanicum had struggled for millennia to preserve were wiped out in days. Knowledge that could never be recovered, gone in the flash of a plasma blast or the corruption of a data stream. And the traitors did not simply vanish. Those members of the Mechanicum who had sided with Horus, who had tasted the forbidden fruit of unrestricted knowledge and found it too sweet to abandon, fled the Imperium in the aftermath of the heresy's end. They took refuge in the Eye of Terror, in dark corners of the galaxy, in places where the light of the Astronomicon did not reach and the laws of the Imperium held no sway. There they became the Dark Mechanicum, the shadow of the priesthood of Mars, a twisted mirror of the Adeptus Mechanicus that embraces every technology that the Loyalists have declared forbidden. The Dark Mechanicum. Even the name sends shivers through the forged temples of the loyal Mechanicus. These are tech priests who have rejected every restriction, every taboo, every safeguard that the Adeptus Mechanicus has put in place to prevent the catastrophes of the past from recurring. They build artificial intelligences. They experiment with warp-based technologies. They create demon engines, at nightmarish fusions of machine and malevolent warp entity that are among the most terrible weapons in the Chaos arsenal. They manipulate the human genome without restraint. They deploy scrap code as a weapon of war. They study the warp with a fascination that would horrify any loyal tech priest. The forbidden technologies of the Dark Mechanicum read like a catalogue of humanity's worst fears made real. Psychosonic weapons that drive their victims insane with sound. Gene atrocities that twist living flesh into new and terrible forms. Obliterator virus, a techno-organic plague that fuses man and machine into something that is neither, a walking weapons platform of living metal and screaming flesh. The Dark Mechanicum has no boundaries, no restrictions, no taboos. They pursue knowledge at any cost, in any form, from any source. And the price they have paid for this freedom is their humanity, or what little of it they had left. The schism of Mars left wounds on the Adeptus Mechanicus that have never fully healed. The loss of knowledge was catastrophic. The betrayal of half the priesthood was traumatic. And the continued existence of the Dark Mechanicum, out there in the darkness, still building, still experimenting, still pushing the boundaries of what technology can do when unfettered by morality, serves as a constant reminder of how close the loyal Mechanicus came to falling into the same abyss. The political fallout was significant as well. Before the heresy, the Mechanicum had been headed by a single fabricator general whose authority was more or less absolute. After the heresy, with both Kelbor Hal and Cain claiming the title simultaneously, as a situation that the Mechanicum called the binary succession, the entire governing structure had to be rebuilt. The result was the modern Adeptus Mechanicus, reorganized and restructured as part of the new imperial order that emerged from the ashes of the heresy. The title of Fabricator General was retained, but the position's power was somewhat more constrained, balanced against the collective authority of the various Forge worlds and the oversight of the broader Imperium. In the 10 millennia since the heresy, the Adeptus Mechanicus has continued to serve the Imperium, but the memory of the schism has made it both more conservative and more suspicious. Innovation is viewed with deep distrust. New technologies are examined with microscopic scrutiny for any hint of heresy. The boundaries between acceptable research and tech heresy are policed with ruthless efficiency by organizations like the Lord's Dragon and the Collegiate Extremis, internal watchdog groups that hunt down heretics with the same zeal that the Inquisition hunts heretics. The trauma of the schism has made the Mechanicus afraid of its own potential, afraid that the next great innovation might also be the next great catastrophe. And so they cling to the old ways, the proven ways, the safe ways, even as the Imperium crumbles around them for want of the very technologies that their fear prevents them from developing. This is one of the great tragedies of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The Adeptus Mechanicus possesses the knowledge and the capability to advance human technology far beyond its current level. There are individual tech priests who understand principles of science that could revolutionize the Imperium. But the institutional culture of the Mechanicus, shaped by 10,000 years of trauma and conservatism, prevents them from acting on that knowledge. The result is an Imperium that is slowly decaying, its technology degrading generation by generation, not because the knowledge to prevent that decay does not exist, but because the will to use it has been crushed by fear of heresy, fear of the dark Mechanicum, fear of another schism, fear that the pursuit of knowledge, the very thing the Mechanicus was created to champion, might lead to humanity's destruction rather than its salvation. Let us now turn our attention to the inner workings of the Adeptus Mechanicus itself. Because if the Mechanicus is an empire within an empire, then it is an empire with its own aristocracy, its own bureaucracy, its own military, and its own bewilderingly complex hierarchy of ranks and titles that would take a lifetime to fully unravel. At the top of the Mechanicus sits the Fabricator General of Mars. This is the most powerful individual in the entire priesthood of Mars, a figure whose authority within the Mechanicus is comparable to, and in some ways exceeds, that of the Emperor himself within the wider Imperium. The Fabricator General holds a permanent seat on the High Lords of Terror, the council that governs the Imperium in the Emperor's name, and commands the allegiance of every Forge world, every Titan Legion, every Skitarii cohort, and every tech priest in the galaxy. In theory, anyway. In practice, the relationship between the Fabricator General and the various Forge worlds is rather more complex, more like the relationship between a powerful medieval king and his feudal vassals. Each Forge world is technically subordinate to Mars, but many enjoy such a high degree of autonomy that they are, for all practical purposes, independent states within the Mechanicus's own empire. Beneath the Fabricator General is the Fabricator Locum, essentially the deputy leader of Mars, and below that, the hierarchy fans out into a vast and intricate web of ranks that would take hours to fully describe. But let us touch on the most important ones. The Archmagi are the senior leadership of the Mechanicus, the ruling class of the priesthood. Each Archmagos is a figure of enormous power and influence, a tech priest who has spent centuries, that's sometimes millennia, accumulating knowledge, augmentations, and political connections. They tend to be grotesque figures by human standards, their original bodies long since replaced by masses of cables, mechanical limbs, sensor arrays, and arcane devices whose function might be obvious only to their creator. An Archmagos is not a person in any conventional sense. They are a living library, a walking database, a consciousness embedded in a framework of sacred technology that serves simultaneously as their body, their workshop, and their instrument of war. Below the Archmagi are the Magi, senior tech priests who have attained mastery in one of the many disciplines that the Mechanicus recognizes. There are Magi Technicus, who specialize in the maintenance and construction of machines, Magi Metallurgicus, who are masters of metallurgy and materials science, Magi Alchemies, who work with chemical compounds and processes, Magi Biologists, who study organic systems and biological engineering, Magi Explorator, who lead the expeditions into uncharted space in search of lost technology, Magi Reductor, who specialize in siege warfare and the demolition of enemy fortifications, and many, many more. The Mechanicus has subdivisions for virtually every field of knowledge, each with its own traditions, its own internal hierarchy, and its own jealously guarded secrets. There are also the more militant branches of the Mechanicus hierarchy. The Magos Dominus commands the Mechanicus's military forces. The techno-archaeologists, like the legendary Arkan Land, specialize in the recovery of ancient technology from the ruins of lost civilizations. The Genitors study the mysteries of biological systems and gene science. The Logis are the data priests, specializing in statistical analysis, prediction, and the processing of vast quantities of information. The Artisans are the master craftsmen, the ones who actually build the machines and weapons that the Mechanicus is famous for. Each of these disciplines has its own internal hierarchy, its own traditions, and its own fierce rivalries with the other branches. A magos biologus might look down on a magos metallurgicus as a grease-stained mechanic who lacks the sophistication to work with living systems. A magos reductor might view a magos explorator as a glorified treasure hunter who lacks the discipline to apply knowledge in a military context. These rivalries are not just personal, they are institutional, baked into the very structure of the Mechanicus over millennia of competition for resources, influence, and the most precious commodity of all, knowledge. The internal politics of the Mechanicus are as Byzantine and ruthless as anything in the Imperium. Forge worlds compete with each other for contracts, for STC fragments, for the favor of the fabricator general. Individual tech priests scheme and maneuver for promotion, for access to restricted knowledge, for the resources to pursue their own research agendas. Alliances are formed and broken. Enemies are made and, when convenient, eliminated. The Mechanicus may worship the cold logic of the machine, but its internal affairs are thoroughly, sometimes ruthlessly, human. And then, there are the factions within the Mechanicus that cut across the formal hierarchy. Not all tech priests agree on the fundamental questions of their faith, and these disagreements give rise to schools of thought that function almost as political parties within the priesthood. The most orthodox faction holds to the traditional interpretation of the cult Mechanicus. Knowledge is sacred. Innovation is heresy. The proper role of the tech priest is to preserve and recover existing knowledge, not to create new knowledge. Machines should be maintained and replicated according to the ancient templates, not modified or improved upon. Any deviation from the established patterns is an affront to the machine god and must be punished. On the other side of the spectrum are the more radical elements, tech priests, who believe that the Mechanicus has become too conservative, too hidebound, too afraid of its own potential. But these radicals argue that the quest for knowledge demands not just the recovery of old technology, but the development of new technology. They push the boundaries of what is considered acceptable research, sometimes crossing into territory that the orthodox faction considers heretical. The Xenorites of Styges 8, for example, study alien technology, a practice that many other Forge worlds consider dangerously close to tech heresy. Yet Styges 8 has survived for millennia, and the knowledge gained from its study of Xenos artifacts has proven valuable on more than one occasion. Between these extremes lies a vast middle ground of tech priests who hold varying positions on the spectrum of conservatism and innovation. Some are pragmatists, willing to bend the rules when circumstances demand it, while others are purists who would rather see the Imperium fall than compromise the sanctity of the cult's teachings. The balance of power between these factions shifts constantly, influenced by political events, military victories and defeats, and the ever-present threat of the Dark Mechanicum, which serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when the pursuit of knowledge is allowed to proceed without restraint. Now let us talk about the armies of the Mechanicus, because for all their theological debates and political maneuvering, the tech priests of Mars are also warriors. Fearsome, relentless, terrifyingly well-armed warriors who command some of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. The backbone of the Mechanicus's military is the Scitarii, also known as the Tech Guard. These are the cybernetic foot soldiers of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the tireless warriors who defend the Forge worlds, fight at the vanguard of the quest for knowledge, and extend the reach of the cult Mechanicus into the stars. To understand the Scitarii is to understand what happens when the Mechanicus's philosophy of the machine's superiority over flesh is applied to the art of war. A Scitarius begins as a human being, sometimes a volunteer, drawn to the cult Mechanicus by genuine faith or ambition, sometimes a conscript taken from the menial populations of the Forge worlds and pressed into service whether they consent or not. Sometimes a person bred for the purpose, the product of eugenics programs that emphasize strength, aggression, and compatibility with cybernetic augmentation. However they come to the Skitarii legions, and what happens to them next is the same. They are rebuilt. The process of creating a Skitarius is one of the Mechanicus's most closely guarded secrets. What is known is that it involves extensive cybernetic augmentation. Limbs are replaced with bionic equivalents that never tire, never tremble, and can be fitted with integral weapon systems. Eyes are swapped out for optical sensors that can see in multiple spectra, from infrared to ultraviolet and beyond. Organs are modified or replaced entirely to increase endurance, resilience, and the ability to operate in hostile environments. Communication implants are installed that allow Skitarii to receive commands directly into their minds, transmitted by their tech priest masters via encrypted data bursts that travel at the speed of thought. On Mars, the standard practice is to replace every Skitarius's legs at the knees with tireless bionic replacements. This is considered the baseline augmentation, the minimum that is required for a warrior of the Omnissiah. From there, the modifications only become more extensive and more extreme, depending on the role the Skitarius is assigned and the preferences of the Forge world that created them. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Skitarii is the emotional partition that is typically implanted during the conversion process. This is a device that suppresses certain emotions, blunting the Skitarius's sense of individuality, their capacity for fear, their ability to question orders. It does not eliminate these qualities entirely. The Skitarii are not mindless automatons, not true servitors. They retain independent thought, the ability to make tactical decisions, the capacity for loyalty, and even a form of pride in their service. But the edges have been filed off, so to speak. The Skitarius feels duty without doubt, purpose without hesitation. They are, in many ways, the Mechanicus's ideal, human enough to think, machine enough to obey. The Skitarii are organized into legions, each sworn to a specific Forge world. There is no universal standard for Skitarii organization or equipment, because each Forge world equips and augments its Skitarii according to its own traditions and resources. A Skitarius from Mars might be very different from a Skitarius from Styges 8 or Metallica or Graia. The augmentations vary, the weapons vary, the color of their robes varies, but the core identity is the same. They are the soldiers of the machine god, and they fight with a devotion that makes even the most fanatical Imperial guardsmen seem half-hearted by comparison. Among the most common Skitarii infantry are the Skitarii Rangers and Skitarii Vanguard. Rangers are the scouts and long-range specialists of the Skitarii legions, equipped with galvanic rifles that fire high-caliber slugs propelled by electrogalvanic energy. These weapons are old, their designs dating back millennia, but they are reliable and deadly, capable of punching through light armor with ease. Rangers are fitted with enhanced sensory equipment and can operate for extended periods in the wilderness, tracking enemy movements and reporting intelligence back to their tech priest masters. Vanguard, on the other hand, are something altogether more terrifying. Equipped with radium carbines, weapons that fire irradiated slugs that contaminate everything they hit with lethal levels of radiation. The Vanguard walk through enemy lines, leaving a trail of invisible death in their wake. The Vanguard themselves are so heavily irradiated that their very presence is toxic. To stand near a Skitarii Vanguard without proper protection is to invite a slow, painful death by radiation exposure. The tech priests consider this a feature, not a flaw. The Vanguard are living weapons, their bodies transmitting the wrath of the Omnissiah in every direction simply by existing on the battlefield. Beyond the basic infantry, the Skitarii legions field a dizzying array of specialist units. Sicarian infiltrators and Sicarian rust stalkers are elite operatives who specialize in behind-the-lines warfare, all striking at enemy command structures and vulnerable targets with surgical precision. Infiltrators carry weapons that generate fields of electromagnetic static, scrambling enemy communications and driving nearby opponents to distraction with skull-splitting noise. Rust stalkers wield transonic blades, weapons that vibrate at frequencies that can shear through virtually any material. their edges humming with a sound that is more felt than heard. Sidonian dragoons are cybernetic cavalry, mounted on long-legged walking machines that stride across the battlefield with an unsettling, insectoid gait. Their taser lances discharge massive electrical shocks on contact, and the dragoons themselves are guided by a targeting system called the broad-spectrum data tether that feeds them real-time tactical information from every Scutarii unit on the field. They are scouts and shock troops, fast enough to outrun most conventional vehicles and tough enough to shrug off small arms fire. Then there are the Cataphron battle servitors, hulking constructs built around the lobotomized remnants of human beings who have been fused with heavy weapons platforms and armored chassis. Cataphron breachers are walking tanks equipped with hydraulic claws and heavy arc rifles that discharge devastating electrical blasts. Cataphron destroyers carry even heavier weapons, from plasma culverins to grav cannons, providing the Scutarii legions with the kind of heavy firepower that can crack open enemy armor and fortifications. And then there are the Castellan robots. Ancient beyond measure, these towering automata predate the Imperium itself, their designs stretching back to the dark age of technology. No one alive knows how to build new Castellan robots from scratch. The Mechanicus can maintain and repair the existing ones after a fashion, but the process is more ritual than engineering, involving prayers, anointments, and the careful insertion of archaic programming wafers called doctrina wafers that modify the robot's behavior in limited, predefined ways. Castellan robots are not intelligent. They do not think. They execute their programming with the blind efficiency of machines that know nothing else, advancing into enemy fire without hesitation, pouring out a relentless hail of bullets from their phosphor blasters and incendine combustors, or wading into close combat with fists that can crush ceramite armor like tin foil. The Castellan robots are accompanied by data smiths, specialized tech priests whose sole purpose is to manage the robot's programming during battle. A datasmith carries a set of doctrina wafers and can swap them in and out of the Castellan's control systems as the tactical situation demands, switching the robot from a ranged fire support role to a close combat assault role and back again. It is a clumsy system by the standards of the dark age of technology, when the robots would have been controlled by sophisticated artificial intelligences capable of independent tactical decision-making. But in the 41st millennium, where artificial intelligence is the most hated of all forbidden technologies, clumsy is all they have. Or the Scutarii legions also field a range of armored vehicles, from the Onager Dunecrawler, a walking weapons platform bristling with anti-aircraft batteries and heavy energy weapons, to the various patterns of tank and transport that the Mechanicus produces for both its own use and the wider Imperiums. The Tech Guard has access to virtually every type of vehicle used by the Imperial Guard, plus a range of esoteric Mechanicus-specific designs that combine cutting-edge technology with the peculiar aesthetics of the cult Mechanicus, all sweeping curves and skeletal frameworks and baroque ornamentation that makes them look more like mobile temples than war machines. But all of this, all the Rangers and Vanguard and Infiltrators and Cataphron battle servitors and Castellan robots and armored vehicles, at all of it pales in comparison to the Mechanicus's ultimate weapons, the ones that stride across the battlefield like gods descended from the heavens, the ones that can level cities with a single volley, the ones that even the Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's own space marines, look upon with awe and reverence. The electro-priests deserve their own mention as well, for they are among the strangest warriors in the Mechanicus arsenal. Fulgurite electro-priests are wandering zealots who have become so saturated with electrical energy that their bodies crackle with visible lightning. They believe that the motive force, the third aspect of the Mechanicus trinity, flows through them literally, and they wield electro-leech staves that drain the bioelectrical energy from their victims, leaving them as lifeless husks. Corpuscari electro-priests are their mirror opposites, warriors who blaze with excess energy that they discharge in devastating arcs of lightning from the electrostatic gauntlets fused to their hands. Both variants of electro-priest are terrifying in close combat, surrounded by halos of crackling energy that make them look less like soldiers and more like walking thunderstorms in Mechanicus robes. The Taraxi are another distinctive unit, Skitarii fitted with flight packs that allow them to take to the skies. Taraxi sterilizers swoop down on the enemy with phosphor torches blazing, bathing their targets in white-hot chemical fire, while Taraxi skystalkers descend on wings of fire to hit enemy positions with flechette carbines before rocketing back into the air. Then there are the Cerberus cavalry units. Ye Cerberus raiders ride cybernetic steeds that are more machine than animal, carrying pistols and sabers for rapid hit-and-run attacks. Cerberus sulfur hounds are more heavily armed, their mounts equipped with phosphor blast pistols that spit burning projectiles as they gallop across the battlefield. This is the military might of the Adeptus Mechanicus at the infantry and vehicle level. A vast, diverse, and devastatingly effective fighting force that combines the fanatical devotion of the cult Mechanicus with the cold efficiency of cybernetic augmentation and the terrifying firepower of weapons technologies that the rest of the Imperium can barely comprehend, let alone replicate. The Skitarii do not fight for glory. They do not fight for honor. They fight because the machine god wills it. And the machine, God's will, is transmitted to them in real time through the data tethers that connect them to their tech priest masters. A constant stream of targeting data, tactical updates, and strategic imperatives that guides their every action with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The Imperial Guard fights with courage and numbers. The Space Marines fight with superhuman skill and consecrated fury. The Skitarii fight with something that is arguably more effective than either: algorithmic certainty. Every shot calculated, every movement optimized, every tactical decision informed by a network of sensors, data feeds, and probability matrices that process information faster than any organic brain could hope to match. The Skitarii do not fear. They do not hesitate. They do not break. They advance, and they fire. And they advance again, and they will keep advancing until the objective is taken or the last of them has fallen. And even then, their data will survive, transmitted back to their forge world through the noosphere, where it will be analyzed, catalogued, and used to make the next generation of Skitarii even more efficient. That is the war machine of the Adeptus Mechanicus. That is what marches from the forged temples when the Omnissiah calls his children to war. Rows upon rows of cybernetic warriors, their augmented limbs gleaming in the light of a dozen different suns, their weapons humming with barely contained energy, their voices raised in binary cant as they chant the canticles of the Omnissiah and ask for his blessing upon the battle to come. It is a sight that inspires awe and dread in equal measure, but a reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, the line between man and machine is not just blurred, it has been deliberately, lovingly erased. The Titans, the God Engines, the walking cathedrals of war. If the Skitarii are the body of the Mechanicus's military, and the tech priests are its brain, then the Titans are its soul, or perhaps its fist. A fist the size of a city block, armed with weapons that can crack open mountains, and shielded by void fields that can shrug off a nuclear detonation. The Collegia Titanica is the division of the Adeptus Mechanicus that commands the Imperium's Titans, and it is one of the most ancient and revered institutions in the entire priesthood of Mars. Its origins stretch back to the Age of Strife, to the darkest days of Martian history, when the first Titans were forged in the crucible of a terrible war against an enemy known as the Psi Carnivora, a debased caste of techno-heretics who had claimed vast swathes of Mars for their own twisted purposes. The Psi Carnivora mechrites were one of the many horrors that stalked the irradiated wastes of Mars during Old Night. Exactly what they were is a matter of some debate. Some accounts describe them as corrupted tech adepts who had merged with predatory machines. Others suggest they were something even stranger, a product of the technological chaos that consumed Mars when its civilized order collapsed. Whatever they were powerful enough that the fledgling Mechanicum could not defeat them with conventional forces. The creation of the first Titan orders was the Mechanicum's answer to this existential threat. 3 Titan orders were created to annihilate the Psi Carnivora, and after a war of terrible destruction, they succeeded. Mars was reclaimed, and the Titan legions became the guardians of the Forged Temples, the ultimate expression of the Mechanicum's military power. When the Emperor arrived and the Treaty of Mars was signed, the Titans of the Collegia Titanica marched to war alongside the Space Marine legions and the Imperial army in the Great Crusade. They were the shock troops of the Imperium's expansion, deployed to the most critical battlefields where their awesome firepower and terrifying presence could break the back of enemy resistance. The sight of a Titan striding across a battlefield was enough to shatter the morale of all but the most determined foes. The sound of their horns, blaring across the landscape like the war cries of metal gods, announced the Imperium's judgment in tones that could be heard for miles. Let us talk about the Titans themselves, because they are among the most remarkable creations in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. There are several classes of Imperial Titan, ranging from the relatively small to the mind-bogglingly massive. The Warhound is the smallest class of true Titan, classified as a Scout Titan. Do not let the word Scout fool you into thinking these are lightweight machines. A Warhound stands roughly 14 to 17 meters tall, depending on the configuration, and is armed with weapons that can demolish entire city blocks. Warhounds operate in pairs or small packs, ranging ahead of the heavier Titans to locate enemy positions and engage targets of opportunity. They are fast and agile by Titan standards, capable of outmaneuvering heavier opponents and exploiting weaknesses in enemy formations. Each Warhound is crewed by a Princeps, the commander whose consciousness is neurally linked to the Titan's own machine spirit, and a pair of Moderati who manage the individual weapon systems. The Reaver is a mid-range battle Titan, standing roughly 20 to 25 meters tall and carrying a more diverse armament than the Warhound. Reavers serve as the versatile workhorses of many Titan legions, capable of engaging both armored formations and fortified positions with equal effectiveness. Their weapon mounts can accommodate a wide range of options, from the fearsome Gatling blaster, which unleashes a storm of high-explosive shells, to the devastating melter cannon, which projects a beam of heat so intense that it can reduce adamantine armor to slag in seconds. The Warlord is the standard battle titan of the Collegia Titanica, and it is, in many ways, the archetypal image that comes to mind when people think of Titans. Standing roughly 30 to 35 meters tall, the Warlord is a walking fortress, armed with weapons of apocalyptic destructive power and protected by multiple layers of void shields that can absorb enormous amounts of punishment before failing. The Warlord is the most commonly found class of true battle titan, the backbone of most Titan legions, and the sight of one advancing across a battlefield is enough to inspire both awe in allies and abject terror in enemies. And then, at the very pinnacle of Titan construction, there are the Emperor-class Titans, the Imperator and its fire support variant, the Warmonger. These are the largest land-based war machines in the entire Imperium, standing well over 50 meters tall, and in some accounts reaching heights of 100 meters or more. An Emperor-class Titan is not just a war machine, it is a walking city. Its armored hull contains everything from barracks for companies of troops to manufactoria that can produce ammunition and repair parts in the field. Its main weapons include devices like the Hellstorm cannon and the Plasma Annihilator, weapons of such staggering destructive power that they are more commonly associated with void-faring warships than ground-based platforms. Its void shields are rated for capital ship-grade attacks. It can literally crush smaller Titans beneath its feet. Emperor-class Titans are staggeringly rare. The Adeptus Mechanicus no longer fully understands how to build them from scratch. Each surviving Imperator or Warmonger is a relic of millennia, a machine so ancient and so sacred that its loss in battle is mourned by the Mechanicus with the same gravity that one might mourn the death of a saint. The construction of a new Titan, even a standard warlord class, is a long and laborious process that can take decades. The loss of one in battle can take centuries to replace. This scarcity only adds to their mystique. The Titans are not just weapons. They are relics. They are icons. They are the physical embodiments of the machine god's wrath, and every tech priest in the galaxy reveres them as such. The crews of the Titans are among the most honored warriors in the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Princeps, the commander of a Titan, undergoes a sacred ritual that fuses their consciousness with the Titan's machine spirit, creating a bond that goes far deeper than mere neural interface. The Princeps does not simply control the Titan, they become one with it. They feel its systems as an extension of their own body. They hear its machine spirit as a voice in their mind, a presence that is simultaneously alien and intimately familiar. Over time, the boundary between Princeps and machine blurs until the two are effectively a single entity, a human consciousness embedded in a shell of sacred metal, experiencing the world through senses rather than eyes, and speaking through weapons rather than words. This bond comes at a cost. Many Princeps are consumed by the connection, their personalities gradually overwritten by the machine spirit's alien imperatives. Yes, the longer a Princeps serves, the more they become the Titan and less themselves. Some eventually lose the ability to function outside the Titan at all, their consciousness so deeply merged with the machine that removal would mean death. The Mechanicus views this as a form of transcendence, the ultimate expression of the cult's belief in the superiority of the machine over flesh. To become one with a god engine is the highest honor a member of the Collegia Titanica can aspire to. The Titan legions, the organizational units of the Collegia Titanica, each have their own distinct identity and culture. Each legion is based on a specific forge world, and the character of that forge world inevitably shapes the character of its titans. The Legio Astorum, the warp runners, and are known for their boldness and their willingness to deploy to the most dangerous war zones. The Legio Griffonicus, the war griffins, are famed for their disciplined tactical formations. The Legio Mortis, the Death's Heads, are one of the most ancient of all Titan legions, though their name is now cursed among the loyal Forge worlds, for they turned traitor during the Horus Heresy and marched against the Emperor in the Siege of Terra. That betrayal during the heresy was one of the most devastating aspects of the Schism of Mars. When the Mechanicum split, so did the Titan legions. Titan fought against Titan in battles of unimaginable destruction, god engines clashing in duels that leveled cities and reshaped landscapes. The traitor Titan legions eventually fled into the Eye of Terror with the rest of the Chaos forces, yet where they endure to this day as the traitor Titan legions, their ancient machines corrupted by the warp into nightmarish parodies of their former glory, possessed by demons, crewed by the damned, and deployed by the Dark Mechanicum in campaigns of terror that haunt the nightmares of even the bravest Imperial commanders. In the present day, more than 100 Titan legions are deployed to watch over the Eye of Terror alone, standing sentinel against the possibility of another Chaos incursion. Across the galaxy, Titan maniples march in the Indomitus Crusade, brought out of their sacred halls to fight alongside Rabuta Gilliman's forces in the desperate struggle to stabilize the Imperium after the opening of the Great Rift. The god engines walk, and where they walk, the enemies of the Emperor learn the meaning of fear. What the relationship between the Titans and the rest of the Mechanicus is one of the most fascinating aspects of the Collegia Titanica. The Titans are not just weapons in the Mechanicus's arsenal. They are objects of worship. Each Titan is believed by the cult Mechanicus to be a physical embodiment of the machine god, a divine being trapped in a shell of adamantine and ceramite. The rituals that surround a Titan are elaborate and deeply reverent. Before a deployment, the Titan is anointed with sacred oils by teams of dedicated tech priests. Hymns are chanted. Prayers are offered. The machine spirit is asked, not commanded, to lend its strength to the coming battle. When a Titan returns from battle, the rituals are repeated, this time in thanksgiving. And when a Titan falls, when one of these ancient god engines is finally destroyed, the mourning is genuine and profound. A funeral rite is held. The remains are retrieved, if possible, and either entombed in a place of honor or recycled for the Legion's future use. The death of a Titan is treated with the same gravity as the death of a living saint. There is something deeply stirring about all of this, something that cuts through the cold logic and mechanical efficiency that usually characterizes the Mechanicus and touches something more primal. The tech priests may have replaced most of their flesh with metal and most of their emotions with algorithms, but when they stand before a god engine, when they hear its war horn blare across the battlefield and feel the earth shake beneath its titanic stride, something in them responds that is older than their faith and deeper than their programming. Awe, reverence, or the feeling of standing in the presence of something greater than yourself. Even in the grim darkness of the far future, even among a people who have dedicated their lives to the proposition that the flesh is weak and the machine is divine, that feeling endures. Now we descend into darkness. We go deep, deeper than the forges, deeper than the data vaults, deeper than the buried temples where the most senior tech priests commune with machine spirits so ancient that their memories predate the Imperium. We go down, down, down into the Noctis labyrinth, and we ask the question that no loyal servant of the Omnissiah is supposed to ask. What is the machine god? Not who, what? Because the answer to that question might be the most terrifying secret in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. A secret that the highest-ranking members of the Adeptus Mechanicus have guarded for 10,000 years. A secret that, if it were ever widely known, could shatter the cult Mechanicus to its foundations and rewrite the theological underpinnings of an organization that controls the technology upon which the entire Imperium depends. The Noctis Labyrinth is a vast, sprawling network of tunnels and chambers that stretches beneath the surface of Mars, somewhere between the Valles Marineris and the Tharsis uplands. It is old, older than the Mechanicum, older than human civilization on Mars, possibly older than human civilization itself. The tech priests avoid it. Not officially, of course. Officially, the Noctis Labyrinth is simply an area of geological interest, a natural formation of no particular significance. But in practice, the region around the labyrinth has been off-limits for as long as anyone can remember. The few tech priests who have tried to build their forges in the area have abandoned them and moved elsewhere. And the even fewer who have ventured into the labyrinth itself have either not returned or have returned changed, speaking of things they should not have seen and dreaming dreams that no machine worshipper should dream. There is a sect within the Mechanicus, a small and secretive group known as the Cult of the Dragon, that has a different perspective on the Noctis Labyrinth. They believe that something sleeps beneath it, something vast and powerful and ancient beyond reckoning. Something that has been there since before humanity first set foot on Mars. Something that the Emperor of Mankind himself imprisoned there, long before he ever publicly revealed himself to the people of Terra, long before the Unification Wars or the Great Crusade or any of the events that shaped the Imperium as we know it. The Cult of the Dragon believes that this entity is the machine god, not the Emperor in his aspect as the Omnissiah, not some abstract theological concept, a real physical being, an intelligence so vast and so powerful that its mere presence, even in a state of deep hibernation, has been shaping the technological development of Mars and indeed of all humanity for tens of thousands of years. The dreams it dreams as it sleeps in its prison beneath the labyrinth seep up through the rock and into the minds of the tech priests above, planting seeds of invention, inspiring new designs, guiding the development of technology along paths that serve the entity's own unfathomable purposes. So what is this entity? The Cult of the Dragon has their own name for it, but the wider galaxy knows it by a different one. Or rather, it knows a being that may be the same entity by a different name. Magladroth, the Void Dragon. one of the Satan, the ancient star gods of the Necrons. The Satan are among the oldest and most powerful beings in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. They are literally starborn, entities of pure energy that emerge from the cosmic background radiation of the universe's earliest days. They fed on the energy of stars, drifting between the suns of the galaxy in a state of endless, mindless hunger. It was the Necrontyre, the mortal ancestors of the Necrons, who gave the Catan physical bodies, upforging shells of living metal called necrodermis that allowed the star gods to interact with the material world. And it was this act that set in motion the chain of events that would lead to the Necrons' loss of their souls, their transformation into the undying metal constructs we know today, and eventually their rebellion against the very gods they had empowered. Magladroth, the Void Dragon, was said to be the greatest and most terrible of all the Satan, a master of the material realm, a being whose control over physical matter was so absolute that it could reshape reality at will. In the mythology of the Eldari, the Void Dragon was a figure of oblivion and devastation, a monster whose warriors were practically invincible and whose hunger could devour entire stars. The Eldari legends speak of the Void Dragon being defeated only when the talismans of Vol, the artifacts known to the Imperium as the Blackstone Fortresses, were deployed against it, revealing a secret weakness that allowed it to be brought low. But the Satan were not destroyed, not entirely. When the Necrons eventually rose up against their star god masters, they shattered the Satan into fragments, into shards of diminished power that could be imprisoned and controlled. These Satan shards are used by the Necrons to this day, deployed as weapons on the battlefield, each one a fragment of a being that once walked among the stars and fed on their light. And here is where the connection to Mars becomes terrifying. Because according to the lore, a shard of the Void Dragon, and perhaps a very large shard, it is believed to be the entity imprisoned beneath the Noctis Labyrinth, the Dragon of Mars, the being that the Emperor fought in single combat in the ancient days before the Imperium, before the Unification Wars, before the history of the Imperium as we know it began. The Emperor defeated the dragon, but he could not destroy it. Even his power was not enough for that. So he imprisoned it beneath the surface of Mars, where its passive influence would do something very specific and very useful. It would inspire the creation of the Mechanicus. Think about that for a moment. According to this theory, and it is a theory that is supported by some of the most authoritative sources in the lore, the entire cult Mechanicus, the vast technological civilization that spans hundreds of forge worlds and commands the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, exists because the Emperor deliberately exploited the passive psychic influence of a captive star god. The dragon's dreams seeped into the minds of the early Martian colonists, planting the seeds of the machine cult, nurturing humanity's technological ambitions, guiding the development of the Mechanicum along paths that would eventually produce the industrial capacity that the Emperor needed for his great crusade. The Mechanicus does not worship the Emperor. Not truly. And it does not worship some abstract theological concept called the machine god. If the cult of the dragon is right, the Mechanicus worships, has always worshipped, an alien entity of unimaginable power and antiquity, as a fragment of a being that once fed on stars and whose control over physical matter borders on the divine, the machine. God is real. It is sitting beneath Mars right now, dreaming its electric dreams, and every forged temple on the planet is built on the foundation of its slumbering power. This is what is sometimes called the grand lie of Mars, the idea that the Emperor deliberately deceived the Mechanicum, allowing them to worship him as the Omnissiah, while knowing full well that their true object of devotion was something entirely different, something that he himself had placed there for his own purposes. It is a deception of cosmic proportions, a lie that has shaped the destiny of trillions of human beings for 10,000 years. And the most disturbing part is that it might still be working exactly as intended. There is an adept, and a figure known as the Guardian of the Dragon, whose role is to maintain the bindings that keep the entity imprisoned. This is a lineage that stretches back to before the heresy, a chain of guardians chosen by the Emperor himself to ensure that the dragon never wakes. The first guardian, a tech adept named Semyon, eventually passed the knowledge and the responsibility to a woman named Dahlia, who is said to have held the position for roughly 10,000 years. The details of what the Guardians know and what they have seen in the presence of the imprisoned entity are among the most closely guarded secrets in the entire Imperium. In the year 998 of the 41st Millennium, 5 Necron Shroud-class light cruisers executed a suicide run through the solar system's defenses and succeeded in landing on Mars, near the Noctis Labyrinth, when their objective was unknown to the defenders. But the fact that the Necrons, those ancient masters of the Satan, were willing to sacrifice 5 warships to reach that specific location on Mars tells its own story. They were checking on their property. They were visiting the prison of their former god. The implications of all of this are staggering. If the Void Dragon is the machine god, then the entire theological framework of the cult Mechanicus is built on a foundation that its faithful would find either deeply validating or utterly devastating, depending on their perspective. The machine. God is real. It does exist. It does influence the development of technology. It does inhabit Mars. All of these things that the tech priests have believed for 10,000 years are technically true. But the machine god is not what they think it is. While it is not a benevolent deity that loves humanity and wants to see it prosper, it is an alien predator, imprisoned against its will, whose influence over human technology is a side effect of its captivity rather than an act of divine generosity. Would the Mechanicus even care? Would it matter to them? The machine god is real. The machine spirits are real, or at least real enough. The quest for knowledge is still worth pursuing. The forged temples still need to be maintained. The titans still need to march. Would the truth about the dragon change anything in practical terms? Or would the tech priests simply adjust their theology to accommodate the new information, as they have adjusted it so many times before, and continue chanting their binary hymns in the smoke-filled halls of their forged temples, content in the knowledge that they serve a power greater than themselves, even if that power turns out to be something stranger and more dangerous than they ever imagined? These are questions without answers, and that, perhaps, is what makes the Adeptus Mechanicus the most fascinating and mysterious faction in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. They are a people built on questions, on mysteries, on the relentless pursuit of knowledge that is, by its very nature, always receding before them, always just out of reach, always promising revelations that might illuminate the darkness, or might, just might, make it deeper. In the 10,000 years since the Horus heresy, the Adeptus Mechanicus has changed remarkably little. The same rituals are observed, the same prayers are chanted, the same technologies are maintained with the same laborious care that they have received since the founding of the Imperium. In a universe of constant conflict and upheaval, the Mechanicus has been a monument to stability, to continuity, to the proposition that the old ways are the best ways, and that change is, at best, unnecessary, and, at worst, heretical. And then along came Belisarius' call. If the Adeptus Mechanicus is a vast, ancient machine humming along at the same steady frequency it has maintained for millennia, then Belisarius' call is the rogue component that threatens to either upgrade the entire system or crash it spectacularly. He is, depending on who you ask, either the greatest hero the Mechanicus has produced since the founding of the Imperium, or the most dangerous heretic to walk the surface of Mars since the Schism. The truth, as is so often the case in the grim darkness of the far future, is probably somewhere in between. Call is old, phenomenally, impossibly old, even by the standards of the Mechanicus, where tech priests routinely extend their lifespans far beyond the natural human limit. He has been alive for roughly 10,000 years, having begun his career as a tech priest during the Horus heresy itself. How he has survived so long is a matter of considerable speculation. He may have spent portions of those millennia in stasis. He may have transferred his consciousness between different mechanical bodies. He may have absorbed the memories and personalities of other individuals into his own consciousness, a practice that the more orthodox elements of the Mechanicus consider deeply troubling. Whatever the method, thus the result is a being of extraordinary knowledge and capability, a tech priest who has been accumulating data, skills, and experience for 100 centuries. Call holds the title of Archmagos Dominus, one of the highest ranks in the Mechanicus hierarchy. He was elevated after the opening of the Great Rift to the position of prime conduit of the Omnissiah by the Martian Synod, a title that reflects both his importance and the controversy that surrounds him. Because Call is not like other tech priests, where the mainstream Mechanicus reveres tradition and views innovation with suspicion, Call actively seeks to create new things. He does not just recover lost technology, he improves upon it. He does not just maintain existing designs, he develops new ones. In the eyes of his supporters, this makes him a visionary, a genius who is pushing the boundaries of human knowledge at a time when the Imperium desperately needs every advantage it can get. In the eyes of his detractors, this makes him a heretic who has committed the cardinal sin of the cult Mechanicus, the sin of invention. The tension between Call and the rest of the Mechanicus is one of the most compelling ongoing storylines in the Warhammer 40,000 setting. His most famous achievement, and his most controversial, is the creation of the Primaris Space Marines. For 10,000 years, the Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's Space Marines, had been created using the same process, the same gene seed, the same basic template that the Emperor himself had designed. To modify that template, to alter the Emperor's own work, was a step that no one in the Mechanicus had dared to take, until Call, working under a commission from Primarch Roboute Guilliman himself, a commission given before Guilliman's internment in stasis at the end of the heresy, Call spent 10,000 years perfecting the Primaris project. He studied the Emperor's original work. He analyzed the gene seed of every Space Marine Legion. He used a device called the Sangprimus Portum, which contained genetic material from all 20 Primarchs, to develop new gene seed implants that would produce Space Marines who were larger, stronger, and more resilient than their predecessors. He also developed new weapons, new armor, and new vehicles specifically designed for these enhanced warriors. The Primaris Space Marines were unveiled after the fall of Cardia and the opening of the Great Rift, as at a time when the Imperium was reeling from the most devastating blow it had suffered since the heresy. Their arrival was, by any objective measure, a miracle. A new generation of Space Marines, superior in almost every measurable way to their predecessors, exactly when the Imperium needed them most. Call had done what no one thought possible. He had improved upon the Emperor's own designs, and many people hated him for it. Within the Mechanicus, the reaction to the Primaris project was deeply divided. Some tech priests hailed Call as a genius, a visionary whose work had saved the Imperium. Others condemned him as a heretic, an arrogant fool who had dared to tamper with the Emperor's sacred designs. The accusation that Call had committed the crime of invention, and that he had created something genuinely new rather than simply recovering or replicating existing technology, was considered by many to be an offense of the highest order. The fact that his creation had saved the Imperium was, in the eyes of the purists, irrelevant. The ends did not justify the means. The sanctity of the cult's principles was more important than any military advantage, no matter how desperately needed. Even Guilliman, the Primarch who had commissioned the project in the first place, harbored reservations about Call. The resurrected Lord Commander of the Imperium was grateful for the Primaris Marines, certainly, but he was also deeply suspicious of Call's methods and motives. The Archmagos had created an artificial intelligence called the Call Inferior, ostensibly a communications device that allowed him to speak with Guilliman remotely, but which the Primarch suspected was a full-blown abominable intelligence, a thinking machine of the kind that the Imperium has banned since the Age of Strife. Call had also been known to traffic with Xenos, to use alien technology in his research, and to pursue lines of inquiry that even the most liberal interpretation of the cult Mechanicus's rules would consider heretical. When Call approached Guilliman with a request to be named Fabricator General of Mars, the Primarch refused. Guilliman knew that such an appointment would trigger a civil war within the Mechanicus. The conservative faction would never accept a known innovator in the priesthood's highest office, and the Imperium could not afford a Mechanicus civil war, not now. Not with the Great Rift tearing the galaxy in two and enemies pressing in on every front. So Call was denied the one thing he wanted most, the power to reshape the Mechanicus in his own image, and the tension between the most brilliant mind in the priesthood and the institution that both fears and needs him continues to simmer. There is something fascinating about Call as a character, something that speaks to one of the central themes of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. He is, in many ways, exactly what the Imperium needs. A mind unshackled by dogma, willing to push boundaries, willing to innovate, willing to do whatever it takes to give humanity a fighting chance against the threats that press in on all sides. And yet, the Imperium cannot afford to let him loose. Because the last time a group of tech priests were allowed to pursue knowledge without restraint, the result was the Dark Mechanicum and the Schism of Mars. Call is the embodiment of a dilemma that has no solution, the tension between the need for progress and the fear of what progress might bring. He is the Mechanicus's greatest asset and its greatest potential threat, and the fact that no one, including Guilliman himself, can tell which he will ultimately prove to be is what makes his story so compelling. Call also proposed, audaciously, using the gene seed of the traitor legions, and even the mysterious lost 2nd and 11th legions, to create Primaris Marines. Guilliman shut this down categorically, recognizing the immense danger and political impossibility of such a move. But the fact that Call even suggested it reveals the scope of his ambition and the depth of the philosophical chasm between him and the orthodox Mechanicus. Where they see forbidden knowledge, he sees untapped potential. Where they see heresy, he sees opportunity. Where they see boundaries that must never be crossed, he sees barriers that must be overcome if humanity is to survive. His current projects are no less ambitious. He is working to understand the Necron's Blackstone pylon technology, seeking a way to use it to close the Great Rift and restore the Imperium's coherence. He has developed new weapons, new armor, and new vehicles that have significantly enhanced the combat effectiveness of the Imperium's forces. And he continues to push the boundaries of what the Mechanicus considers acceptable, as testing the patience of his colleagues and the tolerance of his patrons with each new innovation. Over the course of 10,000 years, Call has changed dramatically. He has absorbed the memories and personalities of multiple other individuals into his own consciousness, creating what has been described as a mesh of souls, rather than a single mind. He has replaced virtually every part of his original body with machinery, becoming a grotesque, towering figure that skitters into battle on a multitude of mechanical legs, more centipede than man. And he has been forced to periodically purge portions of his memory to make room for new data, a process that has cost him much of his personal history. He no longer fully remembers who he was when he started. He knows only what he has become and what he intends to become next. Let us now widen our gaze from the singular figure of Belisarius Call to encompass the vast network of forge worlds that constitutes the Adeptus Mechanicus's empire. Because if Mars is the heart of the Mechanicus, the forge worlds are its body, hundreds of planets scattered across the galaxy, each one a monument to the cult Mechanicus's devotion to industry and knowledge. Mars, of course, is the greatest of them all. The Red Planet, the original Forge world, the holiest site in the entire cult Mechanicus. Its surface is a vast, rust-colored expanse of factory complexes, forge temples, and research facilities that stretch from pole to pole. The sky above Mars is perpetually choked with the smoke of a billion furnaces, and the ground trembles with the ceaseless rhythm of machinery that has been running, in some cases, since before the Emperor was born. The Ring of Iron, Mars's orbital construction facility, is one of the largest structures in the Imperium, a ring of shipyards that produces the bulk of the Imperial Navy's warships. Mars is where the Fabricator General holds court, where the Martian Synod debates the great questions of Mechanicus policy, and where the most sacred repositories of STC data are kept under guard so heavy that even a Space Marine chapter would think twice before trying to breach them. But Mars is far from the only Forge world of note. Across the galaxy, hundreds of other planets serve the Mechanicus's purposes, each with its own specialties, its own traditions, and its own unique character. Risa is known throughout the Imperium for its mastery of plasma technology. Where other Forge worlds treat plasma weapons with caution, are mindful of the catastrophic overloads that can occur when plasma containment fields fail, Risa embraces plasma weaponry with an enthusiasm that borders on recklessness. Their tech priests have pushed plasma technology further than anyone else in the Mechanicus, developing weapons of extraordinary power and, their critics would add, extraordinary danger. Risa's armies march to war in distinctive orange livery, their plasma weapons glowing hot even before the first shot is fired, and their warriors relish close-quarters combat more than most Mechanicus forces, eager to get close enough to use their devastating plasma weapons to maximum effect. Styges 8 is the mysterious one, the Forge world that even other Forge worlds find unsettling. Located on a moon orbiting a massive gas giant in the binary star system of Volcanis, Styges 8 is home to one of the most controversial sects in the entire Mechanicus, the Xenorites. These radical tech priests have dedicated themselves to the study of alien technology, a practice that most other Forge worlds consider dangerously close to tech heresy. The Xenorites argue that knowledge is knowledge, regardless of its source, and that the insights gained from studying Xenos artifacts could prove invaluable to the Imperium. Their critics argue that trafficking with alien technology is a slippery slope that leads inevitably to corruption and heresy. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. Styges 8 was almost destroyed during the Horus Heresy, saved only by the intervention of Aeldari forces, and an incident that deepened the Forge world's connection to Xenos and set it on the path of alien study that it follows to this day. A secret war is rumored to be unfolding on Styges 8 between the Death Watch, the Space Marine force dedicated to combating Xenos threats, and the radical tech priests who see alien technology as a resource to be exploited rather than a threat to be destroyed. Graia, nicknamed the Crown of Miracles, is one of the most fascinating Forge worlds in the Imperium. Its principal Forge networks, known as the Graian Crown, are capable of independent flight. Giant fusion engines allow the entire Forge complex to escape its host planet's gravity and travel to new worlds when the old ones have been stripped of their resources. This extraordinary capability makes Graia essentially a mobile Forge world, a parasitic industrial complex that settles on a planet, devours its mineral wealth, and then moves on to the next one. The Graian tech priests are known for their stubborn refusal to yield, a trait that has served them well in the many wars they have been forced to fight. When Graia attempted to make a warp jump with its Forge network, it was attacked by a Necron invasion fleet, a reminder that even the most powerful Forge worlds are not immune to the dangers of the galaxy. Metallica is known for its relentless, grinding advance. The tech priests of Metallica crushed every form of life on their planet, flora and fauna alike, in their single-minded pursuit of industrial efficiency. Their armies marched to war, accompanied by a cacophonous barrage of sound, as the clanking of massive pistons and the grinding of skyscraper-sized machinery turned into a weapon of psychological warfare. The shock and awe of a Metallican assault can break the will of the enemy before a single shot is fired, and their forces are renowned for their ability to deny the enemy the opportunity to fire on them as they close the distance for the kill. Agrippina, located near the Eye of Terror, has spent millennia as one of the Imperium's bulwarks against chaos incursions. This forge world produces a staggering quantity of military hardware, much of it destined for the defense of the Cadian Gate. The tech priests of Agrippina have an intimate familiarity with the forces of chaos that other forge worlds lack, and their weapons and defenses reflect this experience. After the fall of Cadia and the opening of the Great Rift, Agrippina found itself on the front lines of a war that shows no sign of ending, and its forges have been running at maximum capacity ever since. Lucius, the Hollow Forge, is a world that has been hollowed out from within, its entire interior converted into a vast forge complex. The surface of Lucius is a barren shell, but beneath it lies a world of industry that rivals Mars itself. The tech priests of Lucius are masters of teleportation technology, and their armies have a disconcerting habit of appearing exactly where they are needed most, delivered to the battlefield by the same teleportation systems that they use to move raw materials and finished goods through their hollow world. Each of these forge worlds, and dozens more besides, contributes to the overall strength of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Each produces specific weapons, or vehicles and technologies that the others cannot replicate. Each maintains its own Titan Legion, its own Scitarii cohorts, and its own traditions of worship and warfare. Together, they form an industrial and military network of staggering scope and power, an empire of steel and silicon that spans the galaxy and touches the life of every citizen of the Imperium, whether they know it or not. The Forge Worlds are connected by a web of alliances, rivalries, and trade agreements that would take volumes to fully describe. Some Forge Worlds are close allies of Mars, faithfully following the Fabricator General's lead in all things. Others are more independent, charting their own course and occasionally challenging Mars's authority when they feel their interests are being overlooked. A few, like Styges 8, exist on the very edge of what the wider Mechanicus considers acceptable. Their radical practices tolerated only because their contributions to the Imperium's defense are too valuable to lose. This diversity is one of the Mechanicus's great strengths, because each forge world pursues its own areas of research, because each maintains its own archives of STC data and its own traditions of technological development. The overall pool of knowledge available to the Mechanicus is far greater than it would be if Mars held a true monopoly on all research. The competition between forge worlds, though it sometimes leads to conflict and inefficiency, also drives innovation. Even in an organization that officially frowns on innovation, the desire of individual forge worlds to outdo their rivals leads to a steady accumulation of new knowledge and new capabilities that keeps the Mechanicus, and by extension the Imperium, from falling into complete technological stagnation. And this brings us to the end of our journey through the world of the Adeptus Mechanicus. We have traveled from the rust-colored wastes of ancient Mars, through the golden age of the dark age of technology, through the horrors of the age of strife and the birth of the cult Mechanicus. We have followed the Mechanicus through its alliance with the Emperor, through the Great Crusade, through the catastrophe of the Horus Heresy and the schism of Mars. We have descended into the Noctis Labyrinth and confronted the terrible possibility that the machine god might be something far stranger and more dangerous than the tech priests have ever imagined. We have marched alongside the Scitarii, stood in the shadow of the god engines, and wrestled with the philosophical dilemmas that define the Mechanicus's relationship with knowledge, tradition, and the terrible weight of history. What can we say, in the end, about the Adeptus Mechanicus? What can we conclude about this strange, ancient, endlessly fascinating faction? Perhaps this: that the Mechanicus is the Imperium in miniature. All of the Imperium's contradictions, all of its strengths and weaknesses, all of its terrible beauty, and its beautiful terrors, are present in concentrated form within the priesthood of Mars. The devotion to tradition that preserves vital knowledge, but also prevents progress. The fear of the unknown that protects against catastrophe, but also stifles growth. Yet the willingness to sacrifice human lives in pursuit of abstract goals that simultaneously saves the species and diminishes it. The Mechanicus is everything that is best about the Imperium, its resilience, its ingenuity, its sheer stubborn refusal to die, and everything that is worst about it, its cruelty, its ignorance, its terror of its own potential, all wrapped up in crimson robes and augmented with the finest cybernetics that 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge can provide. The Mechanicus is the keeper of humanity's past and the guardian of its future. It is the institution that remembers what humanity once was and dreams of what it might become again, even as it holds the very keys to that transformation in a death grip of tradition and fear. It is the engine that keeps the Imperium running and the anchor that prevents it from advancing. It is the light that preserves knowledge against the encroaching darkness and the shadow that hoards that knowledge so jealously that much of it might as well be lost. The Mechanicus is a paradox, a mystery wrapped in sacred circuitry and sealed with binary prayers. And that is exactly what makes it the most fascinating faction in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. Because in a setting defined by absolutes, by the black and white morality of good versus evil and order versus chaos, the Mechanicus exists in shades of grey, in the space between faith and reason, between tradition and innovation, between the human and the machine. That space is where the most interesting stories are told. And the story of the Adeptus Mechanicus is perhaps the most interesting story in the entire grim darkness of the far future. The forge fires still burn. The binary hymns still echo through the smoke-filled halls. The tech priests still chant their prayers and anoint their machines with sacred oils. The Scitarii still march, tireless and relentless, into whatever battle the Omnissiah demands. The god engines still walk, their war horns shaking the earth and their weapons speaking the language of annihilation. And somewhere beneath the surface of Mars, in the deepest recesses of the Noctis Labyrinth, something ancient and vast and incomprehensible continues to dream. The Mechanicus endures, as it always has, as it always will, and there you have it, friends. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the priesthood of Mars, the most mysterious faction in Warhammer 40,000. We have barely scratched the surface, of course. There are volumes more to say about every aspect of this extraordinary organization, from the individual histories of specific forge worlds to the personal stories of legendary tech priests, from the esoteric details of the cult Mechanicus's theology to the terrifying capabilities of weapons that we have only mentioned in passing. But I hope that this journey has given you a sense of the depth and complexity that makes the Mechanicus so endlessly compelling. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of the Adeptus Mechanicus, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells the algorithm that this is the kind of content you want to see more of. And if you are not already subscribed to Q on 40,000, then now is the perfect time to join the community. We have so much more Warhammer 40,000 content coming, so many more stories to tell and mysteries to explore, and I would love to have you along for the ride. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload, and leave me a comment letting me know what faction or topic you would like to see covered next. Until next time, stay curious, stay loyal, and remember, knowledge is power. Guard it well.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.